Hello, and welcome to FRSC 1132, Fire and Emergency Service Instructor. The text we'll be using is from Ifsta, Fire and Emergency Service Instructor 9th edition, which is the new one out there, gang. I'm your instructor, Adam Roberts, and for those of you that are not Athens Technical College students, I'm glad that you're watching this YouTube video. I hope you get something out of it. And if you have any questions, same as my students, feel free to email me at aroberts@athenstech.edu, or you can give me a call in the office at 706-357-0162. So before we get going too good into this, a couple of things for my Athens Tech students. I do want you guys to keep in mind that we will be covering all the material for Instructor 1 and Instructor 2 in the text. So count on doing about 2 chapters a week, as well as the review questions and of course the auxiliary assignments that you can find in Blackboard. Now, one thing to keep in mind is by the end of the class, your final project will be to actually conduct a class. So you're going to be doing a lesson plan, you're going to be doing a actual presentation, as well as a test, and all the other components that make up giving a block of instruction. So you need to go ahead and start thinking about that now. And as we're working through these chapters, go ahead and start working on this final project. Now, the final project, I do want you to do something similar to what I'm doing here. Feel free to make your own PowerPoint. Make sure that it is voice narrated at a minimum. And we'll talk more about your lesson plans, but I do want them to be written out longhand. So essentially, you're going to be reading what you have written for that. So, with that being said, what do you say we go ahead and jump into Chapter 1, the instructor as a professional. Learning objective number 1. Describe the characteristics of an effective instructor. And before we go into this, it's important to know, gang, that of course training is vital to all fire and emergency service organizations. And what is training? Why do we do it? And basically it ensures that all your personnel can conduct emergency and non-emergency operations in a safe, effective, efficient, and consistent manner, ensuring that personal attention to the proficiency level required to do the job. So basically, what we're doing again is training these people to make sure they can do their job, and they can do it safely, they can do it quickly, and do it effectively. And in order to get them there, we need to make sure that the instructor is a good instructor and they're effective. So that's where we're going to go to next. While on the surface, some may find little difference between the term teacher and instructor. However, there can be actually a large distinction between the two. Now, this manual will apply the term instructor to discuss the responsibilities of the individual charged with the training of the personnel in the fire and emergency services. Similarly, the term education and training are often used interchangeably in fire and emergency service organizations. However, they are quite different in terms of their meaning. Now, key term, let's focus on this. Education is generally understood as the acquisition of knowledge, usually through academic means such as a college or a university course, as what you're going through here. Now, training is primarily the transfer of knowledge regarding vocational or technical skills. So when we kind of put those together, they seem similar, but they're not. So education and training go hand in hand. And education is more, okay, let's get the book knowledge down, the academics down, and then training is actually a change in behavior where now that we know the reason why we're doing something, we're actually doing it and we have a change in behavior and we're actually performing the action. So more of that hands-on. So we're bridging that gap from, okay, in theory we've learned this, now training, we're doing the task, we're actually putting it on. We're actually using different patterns, we're washing our hands, whatever the case may be that we've learned in that cognitive portion. And what I mean by cognitive, again, is that whole brain power of, okay, we remember that normal respirations for an adult is 12 to 20, or we're, knowing that a fog pattern versus a solid pattern, droplets versus a straight stream. And then we're in turn applying that and putting it into practice. Now, when we look at training and education, there are a lot of different ways we can get training and education in public safety. So first, it can come from your fire and emergency organization training division or organization. So that means that, hey, you've got a job at the fire department and they decide to educate and train you how to be a firefighter one because you're walking in off the street, 18 years old with a high school diploma and GED and full of anticipation, hope, and enthusiasm. And they train you there. Now, other places you can get training can be state, provincial, regional, or national training academies. For example, in Georgia, you have GPSTC, Georgia Public Safety Training Center, and that's a place where not only can you get entry-level training at all disciplines, but you can get advanced level training such as arson, instructor 1, instructor 2, crime scene technician, you name it. So these places are a great way to continue your education as well as reinforce some of the things that you've learned at the beginning of your career. Or if you're starting out your career, these places a lot of times also offer that entry level training. Other places you have can be your vocational or tech schools or community colleges, and of course your universities, where you can excel and move on. Starting at the latter, your vocational or tech schools, you can get certifications as a firefighter, certifications as an instructor, an inspector, or an investigator, and you can also get your associate's degree. And then, if you want to continue on, and maybe you want to try to become a battalion chief or a fire chief one day. And of course, the way the industry is going, they're going to want that piece of paper that either says associates, bachelor's, or even master's. And that's where you're looking at your community colleges and universities. And on a side note, plug for Athens Technical College, we are regionally accredited. Even though you're doing this program online, all our stuff will transfer. For example, you can take your entire associate's degree here at Athens Technical College and take it over to East Georgia, where they have a bachelor's and master's in fire science. Or you could go over to Mercer University out there near Macon, and they have a program in public safety administration as well as organizational leadership and emergency management, where you can also continue your education on that track for, again, your bachelor's as well as your master's. And now there are other organizations as well, such as your professional organizations like International Association of Fire Chiefs or the Everyone Goes Home organization that has some great stuff on there in terms of seatbelt uses and the life safety initiatives and things of that nature. Um, International Association of Arson Investigators, CFI trainer, for example. So there are a lot of resources out there that you can get and use, and a lot of the stuff is free. You just got to hunt it down and find it. And if you're looking for something specific, again, feel free to shoot me an email or a call, and I'll see if I can't hook you up with some stuff. Or if you've got some great ideas, feel free to send it back my way, and I'll be glad to post it out or maybe use it in a class or whatever the case may be. Finally, you also have private training organizations. Uh, More so in Georgia, not really in the fire service, but for example, EMT. We all know that a lot of our calls in the fire service revolve around EMS in terms of the amount of calls we run. And there are a lot of organizations that are private for profit, meaning they want your money, and they can train you in possibly a shorter amount of time, like a Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 kind of thing, and cram it down your throat and help you get your training that way in terms of getting your EMT certification. Now, regardless of where you're teaching at or who you are teaching for, now you may just be asked to do a little local in-service about a new SOP, protocol, or maybe something that you've learned at a training class. There are certain characteristics to be an effective instructor, and we're going to run through all of them right here, right quick, and then we're going to dive into each one and talk a little bit more. So if you want to know stuff to highlight in the book, here you go. Start, getting out the yellow, green, pot pink, whatever is your poison, and go ahead and highlight this stuff and start making some notes on examples of each. Hint, 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 cough, cough, cough. You may see that later in a quiz. Possibly. Got to keep you guys honest. All right, so characteristics of an effective instructor. You got to have a desire to teach. And not just, again, a desire to teach, but a passion for what you're teaching. And we'll go more into this later. You got to have motivation. You need to have subject and teaching competencies. You need leadership abilities, strong interpersonal skills, the ability for preparation and organization, and you need to have ingenuity. That's a big one. Creativity and flexibility. More great characteristics: empathy, conflict resolution skills, fairness, personal integrity, honesty, and sincerity. Now, instructors often telegraph their desire to teach as enthusiasm. And we've all heard it, but enthusiasm is contagious. If you are excited about what you're teaching and you know a lot about it and you explain why and you're passionate, that is going to spread to your students and they're going to become enthused about it and excited, and then they're going to want to go back and talk about it and hopefully again start a change for the good in whatever they've learned. Now, effective instructors strive to instill this vision that they have and inspire within the organization, as I said, by inspiring the younger students or senior students, whatnot, about a new idea, a new topic. You're going to start creating change. And really, that's what we want to do, either by learning something new, a better way to do it, or by learning a skill the first time. And this goes a long way to making things better for the organization as a whole. Now, in order to kind of help with that enthusiasm, there are certain things that you can do. You can have lively and varied vocal delivery, such as your tone, pitch, and volume. Don't go with this that monotone. If you look on chapter 2, page 8, paragraph 3, blah, 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 what's going to happen? People are going to start falling asleep on you, and then you got to start throwing dry erase markers or things of that nature and wake them up. Now, actually, I don't encourage doing that. You may get yourself in trouble, but you guys get the point. So, have a high energy level, what you're talking about, and have that obvious love of teaching and the subject matter. And we'll go into this more in delivery, but when you're excited about it and you start getting students up and having them participate and getting them involved in the lecture or taking them on a field trip to show why it is we're doing things, whatever the case may be, you're going to have a great educational experience that becomes fun and exciting to the student. Then that's going to open them up and keep them from being closed off to better absorb what you're saying and actually learn it and have a change in behavior. And we'll go a little bit more into this in chapter 2 when we're going about talking about our different learning theories. Okay, let's talk about motivation. Instructors must have the motivation to achieve goals and encourage similar motivation in their students. Instructors must show students their willingness to help each individual learn by giving each of them every opportunity to do so. Now, instructors can motivate others by clearly communicating what actions must be performed and how it must be performed. Show them what you want done. Tell them what you want done. Allow them to practice what you want done. And then turn around and, of course, correct what they're doing wrong, but don't be punitive about it. And allow them to practice again until it becomes muscle memory and they perfect the skill. So communication, again, is clearly needed to properly motivate your students. You need to be able to show students the importance of the presented information. People need to know or want to know, why am I learning this? What is in it for me? Why do I need to know this? And if you start putting that out there, that gives you that buy-in. So instead of, I'm here just because I was told to be and I'm going to suffer through it, they're actually accepting it, saying, hey, this is pretty important. I don't want XYZ to happen to me, so I'm going to pay attention a little bit and start applying it to myself. Now, you also need to make the knowledge and skills easy to understand and learn. Sometimes, in order to motivate the students, you got to break it down. Find some common ground or something that they already know and can relate it to. We all probably heard the old adage about tying a bowline or bowline, depending on where you're at, knot. You make the loop, the rabbit comes out of the hole, around the tree, back in the hole. You know, there's also a great clip I always show with that from, oh, what is that movie? Not Heartbreak Ridge. Give me a second. Hacksaw Ridge. Hacksaw Ridge. There's a great little clip. If you haven't seen it in there, feel free to watch the movie. It's a good flick. But there's a drill sergeant teaching them how to tie a knot. And I put that little hook in there when we're learning ropes and knots. Because one, it changes up, it gives them a little laugh, and helps the student buy in. But again, that's something they can kind of relate to so that the students know what you're talking about and can understand it. Because if a student does not understand what you're saying or doing or can't relate to it, they're going to have one heck of a time executing the skill and doing it correctly. Now, as I said, allow for mistakes as students practice and improve. None of us have done everything perfect the first time, and if you have, more power to you, but you're going to make mistakes, and it's important to know that, hey, people make mistakes, and let your students know it's okay to make a mistake. That's why we're learning this skill. That's why we're training. Encourage students, let them know that, hey, this is a process. And instead of saying, okay, you screwed up on this, why not say, hey, you know what? You're doing great. That's almost right. You got step 1, 2, and 3, but you kind of messed up a little bit on 4. So you do that, and then you're golden, you're good to go. So by taking that route, you've just done positive reinforcement. You've encouraged the student during the learning process, as well as you use constructive criticism as necessary, by saying, hey, this is not quite right and why, or hey, this is a better way to do it. Subject and teaching competencies. Now, this is very important, guys. Let's talk about this for a second. Now, instructors must have the background knowledge and experience to teach a subject and its skills. Just because you get done with this class, you take the Pro Board or ISAC exam, and you got that nice new fancy, Instructor 1 certification, does that mean that you can teach anything? And, yes and no to a point, but let's think about this. If you were the type of person that cannot stand hazmat, I'm right there with you. It was painful to me. It was boring, and I really didn't care about methyl ethyl bad stuff. Does that mean I would be a great hazmat instructor? And, the odds are probably not, because I don't have that passion. I don't have that desire. So you're probably going to have a breakdown in that ability to transfer that knowledge and experience to your students. So again, just because you've got an instructor credential doesn't mean that, hey, you can teach everything. And there's nothing wrong with that. People excel in all different areas, and it's important to know who is the best in certain areas, and maybe you need to invite them in to teach that hazmat section, or to teach ladders, or maybe you're not the best with knots, and you go with the old adage, if you can't tie a knot, tie a lot, and hope you don't go crashing to the ground. But I guarantee you, within your organization, there are people out there that have that desire and that passion, and you can invite them in and get them to help teach, instruct, and train your students in whatever it is. If you have, a slight, shall we say, deficiency, or I hate saying deficiency, shall we say, lack of motivation in that area. Now, it's important to know, once you become instructor, that you must continuously seek to increase your knowledge and skill in the subject matter and ways to educate. You got to keep an open mind and attempt to learn and understand alternate methods and ideas. And you should maintain and improve your teaching skills and mastery of the subject, material, or matter. Basically, years ago, when I went through fire school, oh gosh, we're talking like 99. I'm scared I'm dating myself. But we were taught, don't attack the fire from the burning side. You always attack it from the unburned side, meaning, okay, you're standing there at the house, you see the fire blowing out the AB corner or the left side of the house. You're supposed to go in the front door, make a left, go down the hallway, and put the fire out. Even though you see, visible flames and whatnot coming from that AB corner. Now, with new studies, in terms of flow path and fire behavior, we have learned that, hey, you know what? you can't really push the fire with the water. And that's what they used to teach. You know, you're going to push the fire and burn the whole structure down. No, that's not really the case. If the fire is going to move and spread, it goes back to air currents and patterns and things of that nature. But my point is, today in the fire service, you will still find people that subscribe to that old adage, and they're quite possibly still teaching the younger generation about that. Instead of looking at the new science, looking at the new technology, and looking at things such as slicers and dicers and finding out, hey, um, you're more effective and it's more safe to, okay, before we go in, let's hit the fire that we can see on the outside, darken it down in the room, and then go in and finish knocking the fire out. And the worst example I saw of this or heard was an instructor. I had a student that was talking to this instructor that they had in the fire service about flow paths and the Governor's Island experiment and whatnot. And the instructor responded back, well, that's not the way we do things here. We actually fight fire. Well, maybe that was a way to cover their bases and still look intelligent or whatnot, macho in front of folks. And in theory, maybe he thought the student was calling them out. But as an instructor, it's also important to know that, hey, we don't know everything and there's new stuff out there. And again, let's stay up on these things. Things change, always do. There's always a better way to do stuff, and it's important as an instructor for you to do this. So when we're looking at your competencies, there are three things that kind of make this up. And, you know, you've got your experience. You've got studying on your new stuff, and of course, your professional development. And all that is going to help you with your competencies. And, you know, a good war story every now and then is great, but, you know, you don't want to throw in an entire class of nothing but war stories. You know, that may be entertaining, but, you know, we may be lacking on what we're actually trying to get across. It may not get there because we're so busy talking about, you know, experience X, Y, and Z. But again, a little experience, a little war story goes great. Develop your skills, and again, look at the material that's out there of what you're going to teach before you teach it. And we'll go more into that later on that preparedness. Leadership abilities, and to be an effective leader. An effective instructor must, of course, be an effective leader. Now, evidence of good leadership includes guiding your students through the requirements, knowledge, and skills of the class, ensuring each student's needs are met, provide opportunities for the students to think, discuss, and develop their own conclusions about things, provide opportunities for students to foster their own leadership skills. Of course, lead by example. If you are having a recruit class and you're on ladders and you want your students to climb that, you know, 80, 85, 95, 100-foot aerial device, would it not be a good thing for you to go up the ladder first, up and down? You know, lead by example. Don't ask your students to do anything that you have not or will not do yourself. That goes a long way in the whole, you know, street credit world. If you're running a PT program in your recruit class, is it better to jog with the students for the 2 miles? Or just say, I want you guys to run down the street and come back in 30 minutes. Or I want you to chase the pickup truck or the staff car or get an ATV and make them follow you around for an hour. You know, that's one way to do it, but that may not be the best way to do it. Again, if you're out there actually doing it with the students, they're probably going to get more respect for you or have more respect for you, and they're going to start emulating you. So make sure you set that good example for the students, Follow the rules, the policy, apply them fairly. And honestly, if one person screws up and you give them a pass, well, it's not fair if another student screws up and you don't give them a pass. Now, look at your students and your situation, and your leadership model will reflect what you need to do. And that's more on a case by case basis, and that's a little more in depth than I want to go in right now. But know that there are certain times when you got to have that, autocratic, I'm the boss mentality to get stuff done. And there are others where you can kind of sit back and take more of a democratic approach and let them discuss and come up with the best solution. So, adjust your leadership styles to the appropriate situation. Now, an effective instructor must also possess these following leadership qualities: self-confidence, okay? Progress through self-examination and clear self-appraisal. Basically, be confident about what you're teaching. Don't BS them, they'll figure you out and call BS on it, okay? So know what you're doing. Exude that confidence, kind of like what we may say on a fire scene or a bad EMS scene. This may be the worst thing you have ever seen in your life, and on the inside, you are freaking out. But on the outside, you're calm, you're confident, you go through your checklist, and you get done what needs to be done. It's okay to be freaked out on the inside, kind of like the duck or the swan. You see the duck going across the pond. It's very calm, it's serene, it's confident, and it inspires people. Now, if we look underneath the water, what do we see? The little duck's feet just paddling like crazy. So internally, we can be paddling like crazy and scared to death, but on the outside, exude that confidence. Trustworthiness. Now, that can be earned with accurate and fair performance over time and positive experiences shared among groups of people, including your peers, your students, and your supervisors. But, trust is earned. And I always like to put it out there with my students when I was running recruit classes full time. Hey, this is what I expect from you. This is what you're going to get from me. And of course, I would always do what I said. And then that starts building up trust. Trust from your peers, trust from your students, and they understand and they know where you're coming from. And that plays right into that whole consistency thing. They know that, hey, regardless of what's going on, this person's going to be consistent. If I screwed up, this person's going to call me out on it. I'm going to get an F, whatever the case may be. If I show up late for class, well, hey, I'm going to get written up or not allowed to attend the class. And I'm going to do that, and you should do that for all students because you don't want to get in that favoritism game. And of course, then you start having, students trying to put one against another, and that's just going to break down that entire learning environment. Responsibility. Accept the consequences for both good and bad results from decisions. You make a decision, you run with it, and maybe things didn't turn out right. Or you plan something else, and hey, you know what? It's my fault the buck stops here. Old adage. And you have, the knife on the desk. Hey, you know what? I made a decision. We went with it. I'm sorry it didn't work out, gang. This is what we're going to do to correct the situation. And that goes with acceptance. Recognize that not all problems can be resolved to everyone's satisfaction. We try to get along with everybody. We try to make everybody happy. But at the end of the day, you're going to have some folks that just aren't going to be happy regardless of what you do. So we do what we can, and we get things done, but accept that, hey, at the end of the day, sometimes some people, excuse the expression, are going to get a little butt hurt, depending on what's going on. And of course, expertise. Again, teach only from developed skills and abilities based upon knowledge and experiences that you have. Again, if you're not a good arson guru, whatnot, you probably don't want to be up there giving a lecture on it. Okay, let's talk about interpersonal skills. And that goes along with clarity, sensitivity, and fairness. Okay, clarity involves the ability to precisely and clearly explain concepts and processes through a systematic presentation of material. When students do not understand the material, the instructor must be able to restate the concept in a style that students will understand. Sensitivity and fairness. Let's go into this. And this really goes a long way. And the best way I can put this is one of the secrets of success is knowing how to get along with people. So keep this in mind when you're dealing with this interpersonal skills, and that can be with other instructors, staff members, supervisors, and the public. So how are we going to get along? You know, if we're at odds with one another, whether it be instructors or students, we're going to have that breakdown again in that learning environment, and that's not where we need to be. So how do we get along with people? And a lot of times we can develop this by having a mutual respect for one another. You know, you're an adult, I'm an adult, whatnot. Hey, you know, you're a firefighter, I'm a firefighter, etc. And you just start developing a rapport and respect and confidence in one another's ability. And that's something that's going to develop over time. And if you're giving a small block of instruction, that may be difficult to do if you're kind of just there for a half hour or hour or whatever the case may be. But again, if you're doing a recruit class or something of that nature, this is something to definitely work on day one and throughout the entire training process. All right, our next topic, preparation and organization. Preparation and organization are accomplished through detailed course outlines, established course objectives, defined evaluation procedures, and class preparation. Basically, it's looking at your lesson plan, making sure your I's are dotted, your T's are crossed, and you're kind of following this key script of objectives or bullet points that relate to what you are trying to teach and get across. So you need to be prepared and organized. So in order to help with that, immediately before a class session, instructors prepare in the following ways. Practice the presentation to determine whether sufficient time and materials have been allocated for the topic. If you've never given a lecture before, run through the notes. Talk out loud, do your presentation, and kind of get your timeline down to know where you have time to discuss things and maybe where you don't. You know, we're all under a time crunch in this day and age, so you may need to go short on some things that aren't as important and go longer on things that are. Always arrive early to the class session area. You know, if class starts at 8, hey, you know, you need to probably be there by 7. Make sure the doors are unlocked, the AC's working. If it's me, the coffee pot's on. And make sure you have all your handouts ready to go, that your AV stuff is working. You've got the computer on, you can log on to the computer. The internet is working, or Wi-Fi, or whatever the case may be, speakers, etc. Test everything. Make sure it's in good operational condition. And if it's not, hey, start replacing the stuff as needed and as available. Always have a backup plan. If you're planning on giving a lecture, you've got a PowerPoint, it's ready to go, and you've already tested all the stuff out, and you're waiting on the students. Oh, bam! Let's start class, and oh, the bulb burned out in the projector. Oh, crud. Do you have a backup projector? Do you have a backup bulb? And these are all things to consider. And if you don't have that, what's your backup plan? Are you going to skip the lecture? Are you going to look for other means? Are you just going to give them a straight out lecture and have them follow in the book? I don't know. What's going to work best in the situation with what you have to deal with? But you got to be prepared for that, plan A, B, and C if things don't work out. You need to be able to eliminate your learning barriers in your instructional environment, such as audible and visual distractions, or again, the uncomfortable environment, such as temperature and poor lighting. That's why I say get there early, crank the air down, turn the heat up, whatever the case may be. If you have a classroom and there are windows, and those windows open up on, say, a road or something more interesting than what you're talking about, you may want to pull the blinds down. Again, start eliminating those distractions. Or maybe it's not bright enough in there and you need to open blinds up to get some natural lighting. I don't know. But make sure that your learning environment is good for the students. And a lot of times I would always ask, hey, can you hear me okay? Can you see okay? Is the temperature comfortable? Now, I love this section here. An effective instructor, you need to have ingenuity, creativity, and flexibility. I'm here to tell you. You got to be creative because a lot of times in training, this is the part that gets cut in the budget first. So you want to get stuff done, but how are you going to get it done? You may have to do what we call a little horse trading, right? I'll help so and so jurisdiction with this. They'll come help me with that. They've got a smoke machine. Mine doesn't work, but I've got the fog juice. Whatever the case may be, to get those training aids and that supplemental material to add to your class than just the traditional, XYZ. And when I'm talking about supplemental material, it could be, for example, in Georgia, we have an organization known as Smoke Divers. And that's kind of like elite group in the fire service where they go more into self-rescue techniques, search and rescue, air consumption drills, a whole lot of, excuse the expression, hut hut and we're the best of the best kind of mentality. But they have a trailer that's like a maze, what they call a maze trailer. It's an 18-wheel trailer that smoke divers ended up making, and it kind of helps teach, how to self-extricate from an environment where you get lost off the hose line and you're blacked out, and you're basically going through this maze and there's trap doors and things of that nature. But that was a resource that I got to use from smoke divers just by volunteering to let them keep that trailer in a warehouse that the fire department used to keep it out of the sun. And then, of course, when the smoke divers needed it, they'd come pick it up and take it where they need it for the class, and then they would bring it back. But again, that's a good way of having that creativity and using other individuals to help get done what we need done on a shoestring budget. Of course, you got to be flexible, okay? Things change, always do. Sometimes you have to be able to alter the training process fairly quickly. Let's say you've got an outside activity planned and inclement weather comes up, or maybe they decide to steal your students for a salvage and overhaul because there's a fire at the local recycling center and there's a whole bunch of mulch smoldering. Had this happen, by the way, and they want the students out there to help spread mulch so it can all get hosed down. Well, that pretty much puts a kink in your training schedule. But again, be flexible, and then come up with, again, a plan A, B, and C to get things caught up and done. So be creative in what you're doing. Use other outside resources. Be flexible in what you're doing, and try to be ingenious and come up with great, new, interesting ways to get your information across on what you're trying to teach. And of course, if it doesn't work, hey, that's okay. We'll go back to the drawing board. We'll make sure they get what they need, and we'll try it a little different next time. Let's talk about the warm, fuzzy, kinder, gentler, mushy stuff. Empathy. Now, empathy is the ability to understand another person's feelings and attitude. And that can kind of be a little difficult for an instructor at times. But an instructor must exhibit sensitivity to be able to understand the student's point of view, their opinion, their problems, challenges, and barriers to learning and communication. So, in order to do this, an instructor must have a sincere desire and personal interest to help the individuals learn without any kind of patronizing or acting superior or threatening. And I'm not saying that there's not a time and a place for it, but sometimes we need to figure out what the problem is, and instead of demeaning our student, finding out, hey, Bob, why are you falling asleep in class? Oh, Bob's been working 2 jobs to get his fire training done. So he's working at, Panera, working the close shift, and then coming in here and doing schoolwork and, trying to cop Z's in between the 2 jobs because they have to pay their bills, or whatever the case may be. So understand that, hey, students have lives and things happen, and try to understand what's going on, and do what you can to lessen those barriers that the student may be facing. In that case, that one may be kind of hard, because you can't very well break out the checkbook, so to speak, and pay the person's bills. But it may be an option where they look to get their training elsewhere, or you tell them, hey, let's come up with a plan, or you refer them to some sort of employee counseling or whatever the case may be to help with the problem. So again, find out what the barriers are, what the challenges are, and invest interest in it, and tell them that you're interested, and try to help them figure out. And that's going to go a long way to help them learn the material, do what needs to be done, and for you to get the point across to your student and make sure that they're going to do the job and do it effectively and safely. Conflict resolution skills. Anytime you get any number of people together, especially in the fire service, you've got the type A personalities, people are going to start butting heads. And that can be students, that can be instructors, that can be over evaluations and tests, the training environment, you name it. And there are all types of personalities and responsibilities to keep in mind in terms of issues. So, as an instructor, these situations are going to come up. And you need to be able to listen to both sides. And I recommend, separating them, and okay, let's listen to side A, let's listen to side B, and then come up and suggest solutions to the problem. And you may have to assist both sides in formulating that solution. Okay, I understand you don't like the way this person is teaching this skill. I understand you don't like this. Okay, well, let's come to a compromise here and say we're only going to teach it this one way, or tell the students, okay, this is one way to do it, this is another way to do it. Both are correct. Now, what works best for the student? And again, you want to do this without showing preference for a particular side of the issue. Um, it's always good to stay neutral and find common ground. Once you start taking sides, then it's the whole, oh, well, he likes so and so or she likes so and so because X, Y, Z. And again, that creates that hostility. And again, a distraction to the learning environment. So an instructor must work to create that mutually beneficial situation while maintaining a positive relationship between all parties, while also ensuring that you're still in compliance with your legal mandates, safe operating procedures, and of course, all ethical and organizational policies that may come into play. So sometimes you got to play referee. It can be hard, like the ref that calls the game. You never know which side of the field to go out on. The winning side or the losing side, or if it's a close game, back and forth. Um, where's that neutral middle exit at, so you can get out of Dodge in a hurry. But again, be able to resolve conflict and do it in such a way as to make sure that, hey, at the end of the day, everyone's okay, everyone comes to agreement, you've got that mutual respect, so to speak, we've all shaken hands, we're over it, and we're moving on to the next thing. Fairness. Now, this comes into play a lot of times, and you need to make sure that, again, you're fair across the board to all students and you act the same way in the same manner to all your students. So you don't have the students saying, again, so and so likes so and so better or impartial. So instructors must be fair and impartial to all students, open minded and willing to hear, consider, and discuss ideas with them in particular. Instructors must be able to listen and understand the students' needs. Okay? Again, this is kind of slippery slope sometimes, but be consistent, but be fair. Now, that may be a case where a test question, if you throw it out, well, for one, you throw it out for all students. Or if you had a substitute instructor in there and they taught a skill slightly different than what you would have taught it, and you come back and it's evaluation or check off day, well, now you need to be fair. They may not be doing it the way you want it done, but is it fair to penalize the student if they're doing it the way they're taught and it doesn't G and haw or agree with what you think? So again, figure out what the situation is, be fair, and come up with a good compromise. Personal integrity. And it's kind of interesting if you ask individuals to define what integrity is, you're going to get a whole lot of puzzled looks and different answers. And I actually said on hiring panels before, and this was a question that we used to like to ask was, what does integrity mean to you? And basically, you're looking at integrity is based on the individual values and morals. It's your personal code of ethics. And I had an applicant that phrased it pretty good, I thought. He basically stated that it's doing the right thing when no one else is around, where it's only you and the powers to be, so to speak. And I thought that was a pretty good answer. But again, that falls back on that own individual's personal code of ethics and their own morals. Now, as an instructor, this provides you with specific guidelines for actions and decisions. Basically, how are you going to handle a situation? Now, personal integrity must be consistently applied, again, to all situations and people. So, if you catch one person cheating and you send them home or you fire them, you got to do that for all of them. And I'm not going to say it's not going to be hard, but for example, I had a student that was a recruit, and great student. Everybody loved the guy. I loved the guy. Just a well-liked individual would do anything for you. But we had a policy of if you failed 3 unit exams, you were out of the program and you were invited to reapply. Now, we had given this individual plenty of training, extra training, one-on-one time with instructors. Uh, we had tried student mentors, people in his group, and unfortunately, um, for some reason, he had trouble with the written side of things, the cognitive side of things. And it came down to it, we did all we could for this individual, all the resources, but it came down to that third strike. And could we have, or I have, passed him without anybody knowing on that test? Yeah, I could have probably have done that. But then that goes back to my own personal code of ethics and integrity. And it was very painful to do, but we had sent other people home that were less liked for failing 3 tests. And unfortunately, we had to do it to this individual as well. Now, I'll be honest, to make my conscience feel a little better, went and talked to the chief and whatnot, and um, the chief understood, the concern that this was a good person, et cetera, et cetera. And even though we couldn't keep him in the fire department recruit class, a good word was put in, and they ended up finding a place for that individual elsewhere within the county. And he did well there. It's my understanding. But again, integrity, it can be rough. It can be rough at times. Honesty. Guess what, gang? Everybody's got a cell phone and got Alexa, Google, and all that kind of stuff. So students realize instructors may not know all the answers. So instructors do not need to be embarrassed when they can't answer a question. Simply say, I don't know, I'll find out, or does someone in the class know, or hey, break out your phones, gang, let's get the Google monster working and see if we can't answer this. Instructors should not bluff that they know the answer. It'll cost them with the student in terms of their credibility. Now, also, if you say you don't know and you're going to find out, you need to make sure that you do go find out and you get back with the student and let them know what you found out. Sincerity. Sincerity is the personal quality of being open and truthful. Sincere attitudes and responses that show an interest in helping students to learn are important traits, of course, for instructors to possess. Now, students react, respond, and cooperate more positively and willingly with instructors who demonstrate a sincere concern for them in succeeding. Most instruction is based upon the instructor's ability to communicate information both verbally and non-verbally to students. Communications that are not sincere, such as sarcastic remarks or offensive jokes, undermine an instructor's educational message and distract students from their learning or put them on a defensive. Now, again, I'm not opposed to jokes in the classroom, but again, make sure they're in good taste. And, you're not in mixed company, so to speak, that would take it offensive. So A lot of times in public safety, we have what is known as dark humor. And what I mean by that is we make light of a tragic situation, whether it be a bad call, we burn down a house or something. And that's a way that some people deal with a situation to talk about it. They try to make light of it. Or they may use industry terms that may be funny to some and not others. So you got to be real careful with your humor and what you're doing and who you're talking to, because it can be offensive. And once it becomes offensive, then it's going to be a distraction and totally derail that learning environment of that message you're trying to get across. Now, when you have emotional reaction of a class, again, that may hinder the effectiveness of your communication. And I said that can be, good or bad. I do admit that we want to, engage the students, and sometimes getting emotion up and running on a topic is good to facilitate a discussion, but then you got to be able to mediate it and put people back in the corners and let them all understand and know that, right, wrong, or indifferent, people have different opinions on things, etc., and go from there. Our objective number 2: describe the duties and responsibilities of an instructor 1. Fire and emergency service instructors are professionals who meet a standard that is based on a high level of personal performance. Instructors are providers of adult education and adult training. As a member of the fire and emergency service profession, they must give their students the same respect that they give other emergency responders at an incident. Now, like their students, instructors develop their own knowledge and skills from practical experiences with a variety of subjects related to fire and emergency service operations, as well as keeping current on subjects through studying periodicals, journals, and attending courses themselves. As a result, instructors are both teachers and practitioners. So, in short, it's always good not only to teach, but to practice what you're teaching. That way you keep your skills sharp. And it also helps with credibility among your students. Now, this arrangement is a benefit to the instructor because it increases their knowledge base. As both teacher and practitioner, the instructors need to possess characteristics that are associated with both of these roles. So they must understand that as an instructor, they must meet the criteria for members of a profession, which a profession basically is a calling or a vocation that requires specialized knowledge, lengthy and intense preparation that includes learning specific historical and scholarly principles that apply to certain skills. They need to be able to process and understand the methods, maintain a high standard of personal achievement and conduct, and be committed to studying the profession and advancing education as a whole. As an instructor, you have many, many obligations, not only to your student, of course, but to the organization as a whole, and making sure that you are promoting values of the organization and you're being a good representative or a steward of the mission statement and the policies and procedures within the organization. You also have a duty to your profession and upholding a high moral and ethical standard. And if that's not enough, you also have an obligation to yourself, because as an instructor, especially a full-time instructor in fire and emergency services, you spend a lot of time preparing for a class, getting ready for a class, teaching things, learning new things, and stuff of that nature. So you may find it difficult to balance a work and a home life. And sometimes they collide. So you've also got to make time for yourself and understand that, there's only 24 hours in a day. And, sometimes we have to take stuff home. But ultimately, you need to have some time for yourself. With that being said, a fire instructor or EMS instructor has many challenges ahead of you. Now, first, you need to be familiar with all the standards, such as OSHA standards, NFPA, ISAC in your local jurisdiction, or in the case of EMS, you're looking at your DOT standards. With that, you also have your own priorities in terms of trying to balance the needs of the organization, teaching the class, preparing for the class, and also understanding the fact that the students also have priorities. Now, you may have a Monday through Friday, 8 to 4, 7 to 3, whatever the case may be, but understand that, students also are going to have demands on their time as well, such as, children, family obligations, social engagement, things of that nature. So you need to be able to balance what you're asking them to do and also give them time to handle those personal issues within their own life. Now, not only do students have priorities, but you got to look under there in terms of diversity. You'll have different ages, which create its own unique challenges, whether you have millennials, dot-commers, Gen Xers, traditionalists, all these different age groups, and they grew up in a learning environment that is totally different from the other groups. So you may have certain older students that really just prefer the old-fashioned, lecture, go do it. And then you may have the younger students that really don't care for the lecture. They want some sort of internet-based, do on your own .com kind of thing. Now, if that's not enough, you also have students with disabilities. And we'll go more into reasonable accommodations in chapter 7. But, you do have to make reasonable accommodations for your students. What if you have a student that is dyslexic? Is it okay for them to use some sort of pen type device that reads the text to them so they can hear it? And if so, do you allow them to use it on a test? Are they allowed to use that device on a state certification test? Or maybe you have a student with some sort of physical disability and they have the use of one arm but not the other. Are they still able to do the job? Do you have to get special safety gear tailored to them? What if the student's colorblind and you're trying to teach a class on thermal imaging cameras? So these are all things that you need to think about. Of course, you have, organizational apathy. And organizations sometimes may suffer an apathetic attitude toward training, especially if they're overwhelmed by strict budget restrictions or lack of additional funding. And whatever the budgetary constraints, instructors should strive to be instructional champions and gain their organization respect by providing thorough, safe, and effective training. Translation: if the budget is lean, they're going to cut training first, and as an instructor, that's where you've got to be creative and learn to do more with less. And in some years, to everything with nothing. And I'm here to tell you that's not an easy thing to do, but it does happen in the public safety injury. You also have to have your collaborative relationships, and that's in terms of talking to government agencies such as maybe here in Georgia, having a good working relationship with Georgia Firefighter Standards and Training, so you understand current training guidelines, regulations, requirements, maybe your regional EMS council person, again, to hold up the ends on the EMS side, as well as even your local jurisdiction or AHJ on whatever type of training that you're doing. So here's a list of individuals or groups that you probably need to have a good working relationship with. Local businesses, for example, maybe you can use their facility for training, or maybe you can get them to donate stuff. Other local government organizations, such as your local sheriff or police department, training organizations as a whole, such as I said, um, International Association of Fire Chiefs have spin-off groups such as the Life Safety Initiative, Everyone Goes Home, your professional education organizations such as International Association of Fire Educators, EMS Educators, Georgia Association of EMS, you name it. There are a lot of resources out there and organizations that you can network and build your toolbox in terms of teaching and finding out what are other people doing, what's working good for them, and possibly even build relationships where you can share ideas and equipment. So, more challenges if what we had isn't enough. But again, you need to be a promoter of your organization. You need to be able to manage directives. And in terms of directives, what direction does your organization want to go in? And then be proactive and not only help guide the organization, but maybe what we're doing isn't quite right, or it's not jiving with new research or trends. So you may want to be a voice of reason and say, hey, maybe we should try this because of X, Y, and Z. Of course, you have to have knowledge of your instructional environment. Who are you dealing with? What's your classroom situation like? What is your field training environment like? Not only in terms of what resources are there, but if you're outside, you got to start thinking about safety in terms of weather, whether it's heat, thunderstorms, inclement weather, and things of that nature, because nobody wants to lose anybody during a training evolution. And especially in hot summer months, especially here in Georgia, for example, today, you got a heat index of 100 plus degrees. Now, if you're conducting outside training, that's something you really want to think about in terms of forced hydration, for as um, supplementing Gatorade and water, limiting the amount of time in turnout gear, cold towels, and rehab, and things of that nature. Because again, excuse me, you don't want to injure your students, but you still have a course schedule that I know you want to stick with and, get done in a timely fashion. But, sometimes you may want to adjust your schedule due to weather conditions or training facility availability. And in the summertime, that can really be a headache. But, we all know that when you're given an order, sometimes you have to run a summertime recruit school. So you need to build extra days in your schedule for these days that are just so unbelievably hot that it's just not a good idea to put anybody in turnout gear for any length of time. Of course, as I said, funds and resources. You know, money isn't everything, but it sure makes life easier. So you got to be a good steward of what funds you have and get the most bang for your buck. And lastly, documentation, which I really think this needs to be higher up on the list, but you have to have some way to document the training that you did. And there are several reasons for this, and we'll go into more on documentation in later chapters, but if you didn't document it, you didn't do it. And what if somebody gets hurt or injured in the line and they claim you didn't teach them the correct procedure? Well, in order to keep yourself from being liable, you need to have like a sign-in roster to say, yep, on January 12th, we taught firefighter X how to do this procedure. Here's where he signed in. Here's a copy of our lesson plan. Here's a copy of the skill checkoff where firefighter Y signed off and said he did it or she did it correctly. So, documentation is very, very crucial. Whether it's paper documentation, electronic, or combination, you need to hold on to these things for quite some time because you never know when you're going to need it for whatever reason. Learning objective number 3, describe laws, regulations, and standards applicable to the fire and emergency service instructor. Title 7, which prohibits employment practices that discriminate based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. The law also protects employees from physical, verbal, and sexual harassment. Now, the Canadian equivalent is the Canadian Human Rights Act. As I mentioned earlier, we also have to be concerned with being ADA compliant, which is American with Disabilities, which prohibits discrimination against personnel with an identified disability. Now, here's the important part. Instructors and training organizations must provide, quote, reasonable accommodations, end quote, for students with documented disabilities. For example, an individual with a documented learning disability might be given additional time on written exam, and Appendix B has more information on ADA, compliant, reasonable accommodations, and what are approved disabilities. And as an instructor, and I've had this happen before, but you need to have the student have some sort of documented disability, what the disability is, and what are some reasonable accommodations for that disability from some sort of healthcare provider. Next, we have the Privacy Act, which establishes a code of fair information practices that governs the collection, maintenance, use, and dissemination of information about individuals that is maintained in some sort of federal record system. The Act prohibits the disclosure of records about an individual from a system of records absent the written consent of the individual unless the disclosure is pursuant to one of 12 statutory exemptions. Now, the Act also provides the individual with the means by which to seek and amend the records set forth for various agencies. Translation. This goes hand in hand with FERPA, or the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, also known as the Buckley Amendment. But basically, a student that is over the age of 18, you cannot discuss their educational progress, their scores, their test scores, things of that nature without written consent from the student. So, for example, let's say you had a student that was taking a driver operator course, and that student's immediate officer, such as a lieutenant, captain, or battalion chief, comes to you and wants to discuss how the student's doing in class. Well, you can very well start rattling out, Bob got an 80 or a 50 on this test or that test and things of that nature, because that would be a violation of the act unless the student signed some sort of release. Now, what you can tell the supervisor is basically, yes, firefighter X has been in class and, he's doing assignments or maybe he's not doing an assignment. So you keep it rather vague. And in terms of Freedom of Information Act, which basically is in your government agencies, um, where the public can request information. Now, your learning stuff is also protected from that. So, again, if they want to know if firefighter Bob, how they did in recruit school, well, basically, all you can tell them is yes, they attended recruit school and, they did not complete it. And you can't give them specifics on how well or how poorly that individual did, again, without the student consent. Regulations are another thing we got to think about. And regulations carry the force of law, meaning that you can be prosecuted criminally or civilly for violation of a regulation that has been enacted as a law. And such examples are hazardous waste operations and trench rescue operations here. And here are the applicable regulations if you feel the need to look them up. And I always encourage you when you're doing any training like live fire, hazmat, um, trench rescue, high angle rescue, always look up the applicable regulations to make sure that you keep yourself covered and your students safe. Special note here. OSHA gets brought up a lot. Now, OSHA regulations do not apply as law to all states in the U.S., but still may be cited in criminal proceedings. That said, even non-OSHA states and many local agencies follow the regulations because they are nationally recognized. So, as an instructor, what this basically says is okay, for example, in Georgia, Georgia is not an OSHA state. But if somebody gets hurt, injured, or killed, heaven forbid, OSHA and other agencies, the federal government, will come in and investigate. And if you're not meeting their recommendations or their regulations, then yes, again, you can be held civil or criminal liable, because what they're going to basically do is say, okay, instructor A, okay, you had a student that, died in a live fire exercise. Well, according to OSHA, did you do this? Or according to NFPA, again, a national standard, did you have a thorough walkthrough before you began? Did you inspect all the equipment prior to the evolution? Did you have emergency exits marked? Did you have fluorescent, glow in the dark exit arrows in a required structure? So, again, even though they're not required by law, for example, in the state of Georgia, you're still going to be held accountable if something bad happens. In short, do what they say, and of course, again, look up all the applicable stuff to whatever it is you're teaching before you start doing the hands-on stuff. So, codes and standards. It's important to note that codes and standards are not laws unless they have been adopted by the AHA or authority having jurisdiction. They are, however, recognized and developed by subject matter experts. So again, if something goes wrong and you're in court, what are they going to look at? They're going to look at the codes and standards written by, quote, subject matter experts to find out whether or not you adhere to these best case practices. Now, legal proceedings have been established that because these codes and standards are developed again by instructors and peers, that they can be considered even when it does not rise to the level of the law. And again, um, the law may be way down here, and you're okay by the letter of the law. But if you look at the applicable codes and standard, it may have a higher recommendation. So legally, you may be okay. However, if you didn't follow the code and standard, civilly, you could also be found liable for, whatever damages or injury occurs because you didn't follow this, recommended standard by your peers that are known as subject matter experts. So here's some common standards that you really need to be familiar with. I'm talking actually read left to right, top to bottom. Uh, one being NFPA 1001, which is the standard for firefighter professional qualification. So that's your firefighter 1, firefighter 2, your entry stuff. NFPA 1002 when you start talking about driving standards. NFPA 1403. Again, before you do any live fire training, I don't care if it's fire extinguisher and a burn pan, acquired structure, or a burn building, you make darn sure that you read NFPA 1403 current edition, and you can find all this stuff online. You can read it online for free. They just don't let you print it out. And make sure that you're following it to a T, because again, this, along with good documentation, is your protection as an instructor from any criminal or civil lawsuits. Another great one to be familiar with is basically NFPA 1500, which is a standard on fire department occupational safety and health programs, and I basically equate that to fire department OSHA. Okay, and here's a great illustration of your difference between standards versus regulation. Again, notice standards are best practices, and they are not legally enforced in terms of, criminal, unless the legislative body adopts a standard with or without changes. Sometimes they tweak it to meet their local needs, and once that happens, they now become such regulations as codes, standards, and ordinances that do have the teeth of law. Okay, gang, so this pretty much wraps up Chapter 1. So if there are any questions, again, feel free to email me at aroberts@athenstech.edu, or again, you can call me in the office at 706-357-0162. Make sure you go ahead and do your review questions and a little quiz, just to keep you honest, to make sure that you did what you need to do and you're retaining some key facts about this chapter. And we'll go ahead and get ready for Chapter 2.